Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Auto Remarketing Podcast. My name is Joe Overby, Senior Editor of Auto Remarketing, and joining me today is one of the inaugural honorees of Cherokee Media Group's brand new Automotive Intelligence Award. And this part of the award honors the top analysts in the auto industry. And with me today is one of our honorees, Larry Dixon, who is Vice President of Auction Data Solutions and AuctionNet at NAAA. He's a longtime friend, longtime colleague, and Larry, good to talk with you again, man.
Yeah, great talking with you, Joe. This is unexpected and quite the honor. So thank you and the folks at Cherokee.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for all you do for us and the monthly reports you've provided us through NAAA, the speaking engagements, and I know you've held various roles in the industry in kind of an analytical position. But going back to the beginning, how did you get into the kind of analyst role, and then how did you find your way into automotive with that? What was that process like?
Yeah, so Larry's origin story. I answered an ad back in the Washington Post back in the late 1990s. So I was just a couple of years out of college. There was an ad for an editorial coordinator position with the NADA used car guide company. And so I'm sure many folks will remember that NADA used to put out what was called the official used car guide. So I effectively got an entry-level position to help create values that would ultimately be published in the NADA official used car guide. And from there, I was offered opportunities to move up through the ranks, eventually becoming the editor responsible for all values for trucks and SUVs. So that was effectively, even back then, just a long time ago, half of the guidebook. Now today, it's probably more like 85% of the guidebook because there's so many trucks and their various trims out there. But yeah, so that's how I got started. A lot of folks these days, younger folks, this is going to sound foreign to them, where you answer an ad in a literally the hard copy newspaper, the print copy.
I have the Washington Post app on my phone, as well as the New York Times app, and subscriber to those. But were you in the Washington area at the time? I know NADA Used Car Guide was based there. Were you in the DC area at that time?
Yeah, so born and raised in what we call the DMV, so the District, Maryland, and Virginia. I spent the first roughly half of my life in Maryland. And then I moved to Virginia probably about 25 years ago now at this point.
Well, since you've been in this field, what do you enjoy most about it?
Oh boy, connecting the dots. So it's one thing to just look at information or look at data, right? And then kind of report on the results, effectively just kind of regurgitating the summarized results. It's another thing, though, to dive deeper into why things performed the way that they did or ended up the way that they did. So you're really telling a story, you're kind of a storyteller. And that is something that I find very appealing, particularly with this specific industry, because there's so much riding on it. It's so massive. It means so much to the economy overall, and there's so much money tied up into it, right? So I love being able to take the data and to answer complicated questions that are oftentimes largely based on your own reasoning and insights and experience.
Well, I'm sure the roles have sort of changed to a degree from your time with NADA Used Car Guide and NIADA and now NAAA. What does a typical day or week look like now in your current role within AAA?
So it's different, as you would imagine, over a 20, almost 30-year career. When I was with the used car guide, and I was one of the managers of the values that went into that publication, every day was dedicated to market analysis, observing price trends, and setting values. Obviously, my role has changed quite a bit with each position over the course of my career. And now with the National Auto Auction Association over in AAA, I'd say about part of my time, maybe 20% of my time is spent researching the market, staying on top of trends, and leveraging NAAA's AuctionNet wholesale sales data. And then roughly the other 80% of my time is spent really serving the members of NAAA, which I love. I came primarily from a dealer environment, or more of a dealer focused environment. And you mentioned in IADA, and of course I've talked about NADA quite a bit here during this interview thus far. And it was interesting to come to in AAA and kind of learning. I had to learn a lot of the specifics in the minute details, if you will, about auction operations, and I'm still learning. So that's one of the things that's exciting today, and quite frankly, it takes up some of my time today, right? Is to understand more intimately how auctions operate, what's important to auction operators, general managers, the industry overall. So while I, of course, love market analysis and connecting those dots, if you will, it's a much smaller share of what I do today than it was, let's call it 15 years ago.
Yeah. Well, the data gathering piece of it, I know it's a smaller chunk of your day now, but and I also imagine the way that data is collected has changed, not just with time, but with the type of data that you're looking at. But broadly speaking, how is that for an auto analyst? How is that data collected?
So the mechanism in which the data is collected, of course, that has changed, but not as much as you might think. So AuctionNet data, and I've referenced AuctionNet data before. So we have about 268 NAAA member auctions that provide their sales data to us on a weekly basis, which we then package and sell primarily to the remarketing community, OEMs, their captive finance partners, rental car companies, and the like, to provide them strategic insight into the wholesale market. When to buy, what to sell at, that kind of thing, right? Where to sell. And it's, I hesitate to say fairly basic, but you're collecting key or core KPIs from each of these individual auctions, right? Sale price, mileage, sale date, things along those lines. And it's done on a weekly basis, which, while that's not real time, and of course, real time has been a thing for many, many, many years now. When you're looking at data like this and you're trying to extrapolate trends, oftentimes real time can be more confusing than otherwise. So this is about as close to real time as I think that it almost should be, given many of the use cases that our clients use the data for. But of course, the efficiency of the industry overall, the vehicle, that's changed exponentially. The vehicles that are being sold at auction has changed rather significantly, as you would imagine. You just simply point to electric vehicles, EVs, as an example of that. And the price of vehicles. There are a larger number of important metrics that will collect overall today to kind of answer questions than what we did certainly 20 years ago, and how we did it 20 years ago.
Well, we were going to have this podcast conversation at the NADA show past weekend, but the snow had other plans for both of us. But nonetheless, I know going to conferences and participating at shows like NADA and, obviously the NAAA conventions and other events and but stuff like Used Car Week. What is and all that is a big part of your job. What is your typical game plan or role at these industry events?
Great question. My game plan is to be as informed as possible. And I don't just mean informed about the wholesale auction market, right? It's the overall automotive industry, which would include new vehicle sales, used vehicle retail sales, in addition to wholesale auction sales, but then the drivers of those sales, right? Financing, as an example, consumer sentiment, what's happening at a macro economic level. I mean, there are a myriad things that we could talk about today, interest rates and what's going to happen with interest rates and how that's going to affect affordability over the course of 2025. And there are a number of wild cards this year, such as tariffs and what that will ultimately do to new vehicle pricing and new vehicle demand. And then, of course, that relationship between new and used. But then in terms of what I really like to talk about or focus more on would be more the wholesale side of the industry, because NAAA has such a unique data set in its AuctionNet database. There's nothing else out there like it, that it really affords me the opportunity to educate folks on what's going on in the wholesale market, which of course has important bearing on what happens with retail sales in a way that they might not know or learn about otherwise. So honestly, because of the power of auction, it kind of makes my job a little bit easier. And I of course appreciate that, but you just try to be prepared as possible for any question, because as you know, you've moderated a number of these sessions over the years, and you're always going to get a question, or I'll say you run the risk of getting a question that you weren't necessarily prepared for, but you kind of have to think on your feet in order to answer.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, part of your job is now learning, working with the NAAA auction members, not only getting metrics and such from them, but figuring out what they need, visiting auctions, et cetera. What are some ways that you collaborate with those auctions, but also others in the NAAA office and other companies in the industry that might not be auto auctions, but that are partners or work with in AAA and are part of the landscape?
I'd say in AAA's executive team, I get the opportunity, thankfully, to work very closely with executives both today, or directors both today and also over my time with NAAA. So there's so many knowledgeable, experienced folks that are on NAAA's board of directors or have been on NAAA's board of directors, like Craig Amelung, NAAA's current president, our incoming president, Eddie Lafferty, Eric Altenreith, Garrison Hudkins. The list just goes on and on and on. And I'm like a sieve observing these folks. And I also get the opportunity to travel with them and to go across the country and visit different auctions. And that's an amazing learning experience, because while every auction kind of operates similarly, the way in which they execute, right, can be very, very different. So you really get that boots on the ground experience to understand, like I'd mentioned before, more intimately what drives each individual auction, and then ultimately what drives the industry overall and what the pain points are. And you'd mentioned NAAA staff. Thankfully, we have some very experienced folks on staff, starting with Paul Lips, NAAA's executive director. Paul's I want to say about a 30-year veteran of the auction industry, spent many years with ADESA. So he is just a fountain of knowledge. and it's great to be able to have an opportunity or the ability to tap into his knowledge base. But then we also have a couple of other folks on staff that have been around for a very long time. They're intimately familiar with each of the individual members and kind of the unique characteristics that comprise many of those members. So it really gives you a good broad understanding of the overall industry and kind of helps flatten that learning curve.
Well, one last question before I let you go here, Larry. What is maybe within the specific, segment that you monitor being, the wholesale market? What's one kind of big trend that you're watching here in 2025?
I would say volume, and if you're asking me to do one, this is going to be hard. Volume, I'm going to give you two, Joe. I'm sorry.
Sure, no worries.
I would say volume would be number one. Our expectation is that wholesale volumes, after increasing by close to 10% year over year in 2024, will likely be flat to down slightly this year. Off-lease volume is going to be down significantly. Off rental volume will probably be flat up just a little bit. And then dealer sales at auction, that's something of a wild card, okay? And that's probably what I'll focus a little bit more on than otherwise, because that's going to be largely dependent by trade-ins, which is also a function of new or used retail sales, right? So for number two, that's what happens in the new vehicle market with incentives and interest rates and affordability. And then how that translates into additional trade-ins or not, which would ultimately find their way to an NAAA member auction. And then, of course, supply and then demand will have important bearing on price.
Well, Larry, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much for joining the show, and as always, sharing your knowledge with us. And again, congrats on being one of these inaugural Automotive Intelligence Award winners. We've relied on you, Nick, and myself for to remain educated and knowledge and help us do our jobs as reporters in this industry. So, well deserved, man, and thank you so much for all that you've done.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I love working with you guys, and I really appreciate the relationship that we've formed over many, many years. And I think that the Cherokee team really just does a bang up job. So thank you very much. Great talking to you as always.
Absolutely. Well, that will do it for today's edition of the Auto Remarketing Podcast. Thanks for listening.